Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness, on the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind. Aiming thus at something else, they find happiness by the way. The enjoyments of life are sufficient to make it a pleasant thing when they are taken en passant without being made a principal object. John Stuart Mill. Now, today's lesson we are going to be talking about en passant. Now, en passant is a pawn versus pawn type of movement. It's a very special movement in the game of chess. And it's also one of the least used moves in chess. But it's important for us to understand this move because someone will take a pawn en passant and you might even lose the game because of that. Now, the words en passant are French meaning in passing. And one of the reasons that I decided to create this video is to shed some light for the true beginners and beginners as to where this move originally comes from and how it fits into the game of chess logically, so everything is kind of makes sense when we're playing the game. Okay, so one of the things we're going to have to do before that is understand chess history, and so I'm going to just briefly kind of talk about it. Now, allowing en passant capture was one of the last rule changes in chess that occurred between 1200 and 1600 Common Era, together with the introduction of castling and the unlimited range of queens and bishops and the pawn push. So this is the pawn push. It's actually able to move 2 spaces forward on the first move, and there's another pawn push. Those 2 pawns are stuck, but moving 2 spaces forward. Now, what's important to know is centuries ago and up until this time, pawns were only able to move 1 square forward at a time. So that's it. For thousands of years, pawns only moved 1 space forward. Now, what's going to happen is that around the 15th century, they're going to start introducing the pawn push as a way to speed up the game of chess. And it's going to work. A lot of people are going to like this. But people that have been playing chess, I mean, imagine you've been playing chess for most of your life, and all of a sudden you're able to push a pawn forward 2 spaces. Well, obviously there was a growing resentment amongst the some traditional chess players, actually a lot of them, who felt that pushing a pawn 2 spaces forward was way too generous. So we'll go ahead and push this pawn forward. That's like way too generous of a move. And this pawn will just move 1 space forward. And furthermore, what they're going to say is, now, if you allow the pawn push to move 2 spaces forward, pawns are going to be able to escape battle. Okay, and what they mean by that is this. Let's suppose for a second it's going to be Chocolate's turn to move, and he pushes his pawn forward. Well, their reasoning was this pawn is going to actually escape battle. Under the old rules, where pawns are able to move 1 space at a time, well, now he can't escape battle. He can Lemonade can decide to capture if he wants to, or move forward 1 space. And likewise, this pawn over here at f7, he would be able to escape battle by just pushing forward 2 spaces, basically passing the 6th rank. So, en passant is created to kind of balance out this game. And again, en passant means a French word meaning in passing. What they're going to say is that if a pawn pushes forward 2 spaces on the first, decides to push 2 spaces, then on the very next move, if Lemonade decides to use the en passant option, it could capture diagonally forward, taking the pawn at h5. And likewise, if this pawn were to push 2 spaces forward to the 5th rank, we already have the Lemonade pawn on the 5th rank. That's going to be very important. On the very next move, he can capture diagonally forward. And that's where that's going to come from. Now, let's imagine this. Now, you have to capture on the very next move to utilize en passant. So, if Chocolate pushes 2 spaces forward and Lemonade instead decides to bring out his knight, well, now he's forfeited his ability to capture the pawn right over here at coordinate F5. Okay, so you won't be able to capture it. Now, it's going to be Chocolate's turn to move. Now again, Chocolate's going to go ahead and push this pawn to H5. Now on the very next move, he can capture en passant, just like this, and go ahead and do that. But, let's go back. Let's say that he doesn't move that pawn. He decides to move a bishop instead. Well, now he cannot capture either pawn at all. So you must capture on the very next move. 5th rank if you are playing as Lemonade. Obviously, if you're playing as Chocolate, the roles are going to reverse. And the pawn is actually going to have to be on the 4th rank. So let's go ahead and just place a pawn on the 4th rank for this example. And we're going to pretend that it's Lemonade's turn to move. Again, most important thing for Chocolate, 4th rank. You have to have a pawn on a 4th rank. It's a pawn versus pawn movement. So he's going to push forward 2 spaces. On the very next move, Chocolate has decided to use en passant, can capture diagonally forward. Okay. He's going to push forward 2 spaces. On the very next move, Chocolate decides to capture diagonally forward. Now, let's pretend he pushes 2 spaces forward. Lemonade decides to, or I'm sorry, Chocolate decides to push a pawn 2 spaces. Well, now he cannot do en passant to the pawn over on A4. Okay, he pushes 2 spaces forward. On the very next move, he has to do en passant if he wants to utilize that option. If he moves any other piece, he will not be able to capture this pawn anymore. So on the very next move, he decides to do it, and he can capture it. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. A lot of mistakes that true beginning students tend to make is this. Let's suppose we have a pawn over here, and a queen, Chocolate decides to move his queen to coordinate D5. Well, they'll think that pawns can do en passant on minor and major pieces. Well, that's an illegal move. En passant is only utilized for pawn versus pawn movement. And again, the reason why was to balance out the game so that it would be more fair for, so pawns can't skip battle. Like this guy is going to push 2 spaces forward, and in the old days, he moves 1 space forward. He's only, he cannot skip battle. And that pushing 2 spaces forward, the traditional chess players were like, well, this pawn's going to be able to escape battle. And so that's why en passant was created, so that all of the pawns are used in battle. So kind of keep that in mind. Now let's talk about a situation where we're going to want to use en passant. We'll see if we can set something up. I'm going to go ahead and bring a couple of pieces here. I'm going to place a king there. Let's take off some pieces. Maybe do something like that. Let's place that piece there. How about there? And we'll do something like that. And for Lemonade, let's do this. We'll have a pawn here. Pawn right over here. And take off a couple of pieces. Give me some castling options. And throw those pieces off. Okay, so in this example, we're going to see, I'm going to place this bishop here. That's going to be the important thing. It's going to be Lemonade's turn to move. And Lemonade's going to, Chocolate's turn to move. Chocolate decides to push 2 spaces forward. We can capture en passant. And there's a discovery check. And this is actually going to be checkmate. And it's checkmate because this pawn cannot block. If he blocks, it's actually pinned by the rook. That's an illegal move. So there's no piece that can block that king, and this game would end with Lemonade winning. So kind of keep that in mind. Just to quickly review, en passant is a pawn versus pawn movement. You've got to be on the 5th rank if you're Lemonade. You've got to be on the 4th rank if you're Chocolate. En passant, you have to use it on the very next move. I hope this video sheds some light on how we use en passant. If you have any questions, please feel free to talk to your chess masters or just post your question on this page. Thank you very much for watching.